Is AI going to cause a white-collar bloodbath? Or is that narrative itself part of the problem? And does the way we talk about technology actually shape the technology that ends up being built? My guest today is Isabella Loaiza, researcher at MIT, whose work challenges some of the most critical assumptions about how AI will affect workers and jobs. Here's our talk. Welcome to the Economics of Work. I'm excited to welcome Isabella Loaiza. Did I get that right?
Yes, that's correct.
Whew, nice. Isabella's been influential in changing the debate and adding very important nuance, I think, to the debate about how AI is affecting work. So, Isabella, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me, Ben. I'm so excited to be here.
Yeah. So let's break down this debate about how AI is changing work and what you don't like about it. So feel free to throw some stones. What are we getting wrong in how we talk about AI and jobs, AI and work?
Oh, wow. So many things to discuss here, right? So I think just to begin, I will choose two different things that I often think about. One of them is the narrative about how AI is going to replace all workers and it's going to be a white collar bloodbath kind of situation. That's the one thing I think we're getting mostly wrong for two reasons. One of them is that, first of all, technology will do what we want it to do. So if we build for replacement, then that's what we're going to get. If we build for augmentation, then we are probably going to get some augmentation. And yes, definitely some roles will be replaced because that happens with all technological changes. But how we design the technology is going to have a very large impact in how we actually see it having an effect in the labor force.
Yeah. Let me drill into both of those points. So really interesting points. But I promise we'll circle back. So this idea of it being a white collar bloodbath, that's more like that's a prediction.
Yes.
Which I also think is probably wrong, but I'd love to find out where in the chain of reasoning is that wrong? And then on the other thing, I just want to note it to maybe circle back to it, this idea of us being in control of what we build and how the technology that we build will affect jobs. That sounds hard. I mean, it's not organized by some central planner. There's a lot of forces which determine how the technology will evolve. I wonder if that is in anyone's control.
Mm-hmm.
You can answer those or circle back, whatever you want.
I agree with you. I mean, technology is not centrally designed, and we're happy for that not to be the case because we want innovation everywhere. We want people to be able to create and build things that they think are necessary. I'm a big fan of that for sure. However, I guess from my position being at MIT and also having gotten my PhD at the Media Lab, I very closely work with people who actually build that technology. So because I'm in this environment where a lot of these folks are the ones who are creating the ideas and potentially thinking about applications, these folks do have some control over how they frame their applications, their innovations, their new products that they're trying to build, right? And yes, we can't control all the companies out there, but for sure, I do think that just like these sci-fi narratives shape what we think is possible, what the technology designers and creators think is possible is going to shape the applications that they think of when they're building their new products. So yes, technology is not centrally planned, but by also helping have a more augmentation-centric, human-centric type of narrative, then we can inspire the folks who build the technology to build the technology in a way that not just replaces, but also augments.
Fair enough. So as economists and thinkers about this, we also need to be inspirers of technology builders. It's a new role for us.
For sure. I completely agree with that. And yes, I also think that not just as the technology builders, but as people in organizations start to deploy these technologies, they also would want to get creative and just think beyond replacement, but also how can I enable my workers to do things they couldn't do before? What can I do as a business? Is there any particular product or thing that I've wanted to do that I haven't been able to do because there was no technology to do that? And then the way that we implement the technology will also have a huge impact on whether AI replaces or augments workers.
Okay. So this idea of automation or augmentation, is that the right spectrum to think about this? In your mind, is the spectrum between automation and augmentation the same as the spectrum between substitution and complementarity, or are those kind of different concepts?
That's interesting. So earlier this year, I was thinking a lot about this because some of my colleagues consider automation, augmentation to be just different flavors along the same continuum. Some folks think that augmentation is partial automation, and I would push back against that idea a little bit because I do think there's two parts to augmentation. One part, which is this story of partial automation. For example, now I don't have to write my emails from scratch. I can just say, hey, I want to kind of say this, and then the AI will write the email for me so I can be more productive. So that is partial automation. But then there is the augmentation that comes from I am now able to do things that I could not do before. And that has nothing to do with automation. That has more to do with me enhancing my capabilities and being able to either think of things that I couldn't think before, produce things I couldn't produce before. So that has nothing to do with automation. And that is the bit of augmentation that we usually miss when we are trying to measure the impact of AI right now in the workforce.
I think that makes sense conceptually, but I think you could also make the case that partial automation, if you think of partial automation, where you automate some subtasks and you focus more on the remaining things, or you introduce new tasks or whatever it is, and then the bundle gets augmented, that can also be enhancing. Like, that doesn't necessarily mean less work. That could mean that you can have more time to do bigger and better things. And, so that could mean we can build things we've never built before, right?
Sure.
Yeah, the idea of augmentation, like pure augmentation, is like, you have shoes that make you run faster. You're riding a bicycle and you're like, something that is purely just leveling up your capabilities like that.
Or you can even take it to the extreme, right? Instead of having shoes that make you run faster, maybe have shoes that make you fly, right? That would be like actual augmentation.
Yeah, exactly. So you can enhance your own capabilities.
Mm-hmm.
But I wonder if that distinction is so useful in this conversation. Because when we think about AI, I'm a little torn on this, but when I think about AI, I think of it as primarily executing on subtasks that are part of a broader workflow and not necessarily doing things that are propelling us forward. Yeah, actually, let me think of another way to say that. I don't think of AI as shoes that can make us fly or the bicycle for our mind or something like that. I think of it as we can offload parts of what we do and maybe get better performance from those subtasks. And that complements our remaining work, which can be augmentative at the job level. But do you think there is like some pure augmentation effect from AI in particular?
So I think the augmentation bit that you're talking about is kind of this spillover effect we get, right? We remove some tasks from our bundle, as you called it, and then we get the spillover so that we have more time to do other tasks or tasks that we didn't do before, right? And I completely agree with that. That is one distinction that I had not included in my previous conceptualization of augmentation as partial automation. So I agree with that. I do think we can get some of that from AI for sure, right? We can see that AI can replace some tasks that we already do, and then we get that spillover. If that is your question, I completely agree with that. One thing that perhaps might be interesting to note is, in principle, AI can take over some of these tasks, but I wonder up until what point do we get this spillover augmentation if by AI taking over some tasks, then the tasks that remain, for example, are so cognitively demanding that we get more burnout from knowledge workers, which we have seen in the literature is starting to surface. And also, for example, the tasks that they do take over, if they make us spend kind of more time on them, which is kind of this idea of work slop that we are also seeing in the literature. What do you think about that?
I don't know. I mean, I haven't thought so much about this burnout effect. So help me understand the mechanism. So let's say you have AI doing a bunch of stuff and you have to specialize in the bottlenecks, and those bottlenecks are just more mentally taxing. Is that they just happen to be more mentally taxing, or are they burnout inducing by construction?
What I've seen in the literature is that it seems like the story goes a little bit more like, knowledge workers have these cognitively demanding tasks. An example from my own work, I have to think about interesting research ideas. I need to think about how to communicate them to other scientists and the general public. And for example, I need to make beautiful, stunning visualizations, right? These are all kind of cognitively heavy types of tasks because I need to employ creativity, critical thinking, judgment, all these sorts of things, right? But then I also have smaller tasks like emails. I need to do some administrative tasks, right? But usually what happens throughout my day is I spend some time doing this highly cognitively demanding tasks. And then when I want a little bit of a rest, then I say, okay, I still want to be productive. Let me shift over to doing some of the admin tasks and doing the email stuff. And then once my mind is rested, then I can go back to do the highly demanding cognitive work, right? So the story goes a little bit, if these tasks no longer exist, which is great because I don't have to spend time on them, I'm only doing the highly demanding cognitive work and I get no rest. So that leads to higher burnout or faster burnout in knowledge workers.
Yeah, I mean, that seems like a very nice problem to have in a way, because, our time is so valuable and we're doing such critical linchpin tasks that, if we spend all day doing those things, then we're insanely productive. Then we're just being used for our most productive and doing critical things all the time. And if we don't want to, I would think we could, instead of relaxing by doing kind of menial tasks, we could relax by having a, cup of coffee or something. I don't know. Couldn't we just couldn't we just do nothing? And wouldn't that be at least as relaxing as doing the automatable tasks?
I mean, for sure, it would be ideal if instead of saying, hey, I'm going to relax by checking my email, I'm going to go have a coffee with a friend. I think there's a couple of things there, right? That should be feasible. But for some workers who are in different conditions, first of all, if they feel that they need to be productive and they can't grab a coffee with a friend because they feel like they need to somehow stay at their desk to show that they're working, that's a very specific kind of context, right? Then they can't do that. The other bit there would be also challenging this very kind of entrenched narrative about what it looks like to be productive at work. I feel like, especially here in North America, a lot of workers really, really pride themselves in being very productive. And perhaps going to get coffee doesn't feel as productive as checking your email, even if it's the best thing that you could be doing to rest your mind so that you are more clear-headed when you do the highly cognitive work, right? So there's several things at play, as there always are with work and workforce.
Okay, I want to talk about AI exposure.
Mm-hmm.
And your framework of EPOCH
Sure.
and sort of how those differ and the best case for this framework that you created with Roberto Rigobon. Super fascinating work, by the way. Would love to get into your thoughts, feelings about where it improves our understanding of things.
Yes, of course. This framework that we built, as you say, is called EPOCH. And the idea started because a lot of the literature that I was seeing had a lot of this kind of doom and gloom narrative to it. And I thought with Roberto, well, there has to be a better way, right? Technology doesn't just substitute for human labor. It also complements for human labor. And this isn't just like a purely optimistic story. It's a story that we do see historically has happened. So given that folks are so focused on trying to understand what machines are going to quote unquote take away and replace, let's also try to think about what are the things that humans can still do that are still valuable and that can complement what AI does so that we can have more productive workers, right? So that's where it started. I think also something that I saw in the literature, which I feel quite passionately about, is this term exposure. I think in previous conversations, we've talked about this, where I think exposure is perhaps not the best metric out there. I think exposure bundles two different effects that can have opposing directions when you look at the impact it has in the labor force, because exposure tries to bundle automation and augmentation, right? So I think that bundling together these two things can give us conflicting insights. And that's why we see, for example, I think in the latest paper by Morgan Frank and colleagues, they found that highly exposed jobs spend a shorter time looking for a job in the current labor market, right? Which kind of is counterintuitive, but that is the augmentation bit at play instead of the substitution bit. So I do think that by separating both of these effects, we can have a clearer picture of what it is that we're measuring and what is the impact that AI is having in the labor force.
So let me position a defensive exposure, which which I know is kind of a punching bag. That I think I agree with you when exposure is analyzed at the job level, but if exposure is analyzed at the task level,
Mm-hmm.
then it's really just automation. There's no real augmentation
Yes.
of subtasks.
I agree.
Things are just being automated. And the way that gets aggregated to jobs,
Mm-hmm.
that's the really ambiguous way that things work. If you say, 50% of a job is exposed, like that may substitute for some work, or it may complement some of
Mhm.
the remaining work. And that's I think the big question. And I think that's it sounds like that's your main critique, that it's really this metric when it's aggregated to the job level. And that
Yes.
aggregation function is totally unknown,
Yes.
maybe unknowable. But that's like our job to understand that I don't know if anyone's really, tackled it.
For sure. And I completely agree with you. At the task level, there's no really kind of augmentation. It's just replacement. But if at the task level, it's just replacement, then don't measure exposure, measure replacement directly, right? So we have a clear idea of what it is that we're measuring. So I think part of my kind of qualms with it, and also Roberto's, is we are obsessed with measuring things correctly, because
Yeah.
even if you think this is a good metric that can approximate something, maybe in that approximation, when you do it over the 19,000 tasks that we have in ONET, or over however many jobs you're looking at, maybe that measurement error actually paints a different picture than what you actually think that you're measuring, right? So if you want to measure automation at the task level, by all means, be my guest. We also do that in our framework, but then don't call it exposure, right? So that's the
Yeah,
first.
I guess the way that I would interpret exposure is sort of like automation potential, but not
Mhm.
actual automation, because in order to automate, you also need adoption, and
For sure. For
that
sure. For
happens
sure.
through a different process.
For sure.
But you think you would feel better if it were just called automation potential?
Yeah. Yeah, I would feel
Okay.
better. I would feel better if we called it that. And also if we didn't, because I think the other thing that I kind of feel a little bit, I guess, iffy about is when you see the headlines in the news and when you see the way folks are framing it in their research papers, they call it exposure is mostly interpreted as automation, right? But then when you inquire a little bit further and you say, hey, well, actually, AI doesn't just automate, it also augments. And they go like, oh, yeah, but exposure is measuring both. So it's like you can't have it both ways. You can't frame it as automation. And then when people say, hey, there's also complementarity, then you retreat and you say, hey, it also encompasses this kind of complementarity. So you need to have the two separated. That's kind of my thing, right? It might be a little bit nitpicky, but as an academic, I feel like this is my job to be nitpicky, right?
Yeah, no, this is the nuance we need. So yeah, I'm sold. Okay, so EPOCH in particular, I mean, it's this acronym: empathy, presence, opinion, creativity, hope.
Yes.
Very cool acronym. Are these really, I think about it as the things that are uniquely human.
Hmm.
But is that the right way to think about it? Like, is this, would this be the same acronym, the same set of things for any technology? Or is this specifically things that AI in particular can't do?
So I think we thought about this acronym for AI specifically, right? Both traditional AI and generative AI. We wanted to capture these things that at the current moment are still very much in the realm of human knowledge and what humans are uniquely positioned to do. I think here my co-author and I diverge a little bit. Roberto is very passionately defending EPOCH and saying he thinks that these are things that will forever remain in the realm of human expertise. And I think I would be a little bit more careful with that. I say, I do think that some of these things will continue to be in the realm of human expertise right now and in the near future. But I think also I try to be very careful when trying to make speculations very far off in the future, because I don't know how the future is going to look like, right? I don't think we ever dreamed of having things like LLMs or all of these technologies that we have today. So I don't know. I mean, I think human creativity and ingenuity is so wonderful that we don't know what we're going to have in the future. So I want to be a little bit more careful about it, and saying, at least right now, these are the human capabilities that remain in the realm of human expertise in the context of the AI economy.
If you had to guess, which one of those elements do you think would be most likely to drop off as technology gets better and better?
Interesting. Well, I think potentially, given that each letter is a bin of capabilities, I would think of some things that could drop off, but not necessarily the entire bin. So, for example, I think that right now AI is not very good at causal reasoning. I don't see why we couldn't build a technology with a different infrastructure that could do causal reasoning as well as humans, right? So I think
Which bin is causal reasoning in?
it's in opinion. So it's bundled together, critical thinking, judgment, causal reasoning, right? I still think that humans will continue to be critical thinkers and still need to be critical thinkers now and in the future. But I do think that this kind of causal reasoning bit it's not like a biological kind of constraint. I think it's just we haven't found a way to make machines reason in a way that it is sound with human logic and not just replicating patterns and the data, right? I think this can be done in the future. That is one. The other one that I think could also be achieved is systems thinking, kind of being a little bit more aware of context and seeing how different things connect together in a bigger picture. That I think could also potentially be in the realm of possibilities in the future. And that one is in the hope bin. So in the bin, we have hope, leadership, systems thinking, motivation, that sort of thing. I think that one is also achievable. And one that I think is quite contentious is empathy, right? We are seeing so many different studies of people saying, well, you can use AI for therapy and AI can even be more empathetic than humans because AI doesn't get tired of hearing you complain or you asking the same question over and over again. And to that, I feel a little conflicted because, it is simulated empathy. It is a different kind of empathy as human empathy. I don't know how we're going to call it in the future, but some people might argue that that one is kind of very nearly automatable. I am a humanist at heart, so I would say, it's a different kind of empathy, and I hope that it doesn't get completely automated away in the future. But, it's an open question.
Yeah, I would think of empathy as like, on the one hand, a capability, but also a little bit more demand driven, like more of a reaction. Like someone is empathetic if someone interprets them as being empathetic, I would think. Where, like let's say you take your favorite musician
Mm-hmm.
and then you found out that they were actually just like an AI.
Mm-hmm.
I would not really listen to them because what I like about my favorite musicians is that I think they understand what I'm going through. They've sort
Sure.
of
Sure.
they've been there. Yeah. And they can, I can relate to them. They can relate to me in some way, but I just wouldn't feel that even if it were simulated.
Yeah. No, I completely agree. And there is research that supports what you're saying. I can't recall the study right now or like the specifics of the study, but apparently they did an experiment where they presented people with different statements, either written by AI or humans, and these were like empathetic statements. And people chose which statements they liked the most. And in the end, I think a little bit more than half chose the AI statements as more empathetic.
Oh, wow. Okay.
But then when it was revealed that it was AI, people still preferred human empathy, even if they thought the statements were less empathetic. And this is exactly the thing that you're talking about, right? We tend to prefer human empathy than synthetic empathy because it's about human connection. It's not about the output or how it looks like. It's about the connection between two humans.
Yeah. Yeah. Interesting. I remember seeing that. And I don't know if I'm going to get the exact specifics right, but I remember something along the lines of that people didn't feel that way about doctors in particular. So I think that the theory was that like people very often feel about their doctors that, they come in like a robot, like here's this and that. And bad doctors without bedside manner, almost like have negative empathy value in a way. And that if you get a machine, some AI to kind of communicate, people actually reacted better to that, which makes me kind of hopeful that there will be increasing returns to humanity for various professionals.
Oh, for sure. I have no doubt in my mind that AI is going to create a lot of positive externalities for some people. I think the goal is to try to make these externalities be for as many people as we can and not just a select few, right?
Yeah. Okay, yeah, the element of EPOCH that I'm actually a little bit more suspicious about is creativity, because yeah, that's another thing that sometimes I see what AI produces and I'm like, whatever, it's like not that into it. But
Sure.
sometimes I'll just be like, oh wow, you really like got somewhere that I didn't get to, and that takes some creativity. It's very impressive. Who knows? But I just want to register my prediction just in case in 10 years we revisit
Lovely.
and see what AI can do. Is there anything that is not on the list that since you've written this paper would want to add to something that you now see as uniquely human that you didn't include before?
Interesting. I think that not so far. Perhaps when I am teaching this, I always like to ask people what the H is, because I think that is the most surprising bin that we have in our acronym. And I like to hear what people have to say. And it's interesting because when I say, what do you think the H is? Quite often people say humor. People say humanity. And first of all, humor, I think is quite interesting. We know that machines are, sometimes their humor lands and sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes they're like, very basic jokes, but then kind of the more layered kinds of things that actual comedians do is still kind of very out of reach for machines. And the humanity bit, I wonder what people mean when they say humanity, right? Because humanity can be so many things, such a broad concept, but it is a recurrent thing that people say in class.
I would think of humanity, and I mean, in some way, my first instinct is that it's all humanity, and we're just kind of, that's the umbrella term. But, I would think of, you know, that being more closely aligned with empathy. But actually, the H is my favorite one. I really love the idea of hope and motivation, things like that being, something that we uniquely add, that's a source of value. What's really absent from this framework is intelligence. I mean, not everywhere. Like you said, it's in causal reasoning, systems thinking. But if we take the collection of capabilities of working humans today and compare that to the collection of capabilities that is an epoch, the epoch collection is a less intelligent collection. And I wonder if a world where everyone becomes a kind of like epoch worker, is that a good world? Like it seems to be like on the side of it being a good world, I would think about it as something that feels very human, and just the whole vibe of it feels very nice in some way. But I also really like intellectualizing things, being analytical. I think that that's like, for me at least, that's a part of work that I enjoy. And I wonder, in your opinion, do you welcome a epoch workforce, or would you pine for the past a little bit?
I think I need to make a couple of distinctions here, right? So when you say epoch worker, something that I think we try to emphasize in the paper is that for you to be an epoch worker, you don't have to have all of the different capabilities that we mentioned, right? You just need to have a really high requirement for one of these bins for you to have a high epoch score, right?
Yeah, I'm really thinking in aggregate, like the collection of the workforce, specializing in this collection of areas where we find value, unique value.
Well, I think that's an open question, right? Of course, I would think it's a better world if, or a quote unquote good world. I don't know what a good world is. I am so sorry. I'm so nitpicky about terms because the
Yeah, yeah.
academic cannot help herself. But if people enjoy doing these kinds of tasks, then for sure it would be a better world if we enjoyed, our work more than we do now. If we are doing kind of the interesting kind of work, right? I will push back a little bit on, because you're talking about intelligence, and I do agree we don't have the specific term intelligence, but in opinion and judgment, that is a lot of the things that you were describing that you enjoy about your job, right? Like intellectualizing things, analyzing things. That part is there in opinion, along with critical thinking. So it means you could be a high epoch worker and still do all the things you enjoy about your work, right? I think it will also come down to what people enjoy about their work. I've actually lately been thinking about running some sort of experiment to see how people react on, people have some tasks that they enjoy more than others, and how they report whether they enjoy them or not, or how motivated they feel if you tell them, oh, this task is more automated than the others. I haven't run the experiment yet. I'm just trying to figure out the right setup for it. But I think that'll be very interesting, right? Potentially, what happens if the part you like most about your work is automatable? How do you feel about that? I don't know. That's why I'm trying to do some research on it.
Yeah, I mean, if you go down that road, one thing I'd love to see is what are the capabilities that people want in their friends? Even if we just take out work, just like, or not even their friends, just like stuff they do in their free time, in leisure, we need some capabilities to be good at leisure. And, so, someone just to travel, to play sports, to socialize, to make dinner, whatever it is, you need a collection of capabilities. And that's, I would think, would be a kind of like revealed preference in a way, because if we're exercising those capabilities during our leisure time, those are surely things that we enjoy, or else we would have chosen something different. So I wonder if that's a way to kind of get at what makes like a good job or a fulfilling job in a way.
Oh my gosh. So listen, you just said fulfilling job. Again, this is one of the things that I really want to do something in the future, because I've been thinking about dream jobs and meaningful jobs. I don't think these two are necessarily the same. They can be very different, and they can be very different in different contexts, right? Because your dream job can be, being a finance person, but, maybe you dream of having that job because it's going to bring you a lot of money, not because you necessarily enjoy doing that work.
Sure. Chasing prestige.
Yeah, exactly. Well, a meaningful job might be, well, I want to go be a nurse because I want to help people, but maybe it doesn't pay as much. So they can be very different things, or they can coincide along some axes for some people in some places. And I've been thinking about this question so much, and I really, really, really want to do some research on it to see if, for example, what is considered a dream job and a meaningful job changes in the context of the AI economy. For sure, we're going to see some changes, some historical changes that are not necessarily attributable to AI, but whether what you find meaningful changes because of AI. If AI can do something as well as a human, is that still meaningful to do as a job, right? Yeah, I wonder about that often.
Yeah, that makes me think of this other line of research that you did, which I also found really interesting about specifically adoption in finance, like sort of technological adoption in finance. So I think of mutual fund managers as, apologies to any mutual fund managers out there, but a job that has been automatable for, fully automatable. I mean, for so long. And, there's research going back decades about like how, active managers underperform passive managers, just, indices. And yet there's still some demand for active fund managers. And I wonder if that is meaningful work in the same way, or if people who do this kind of have to convince themselves that they are providing value. I don't know. How do you see the relationship between these limits to adoption that we see in fields like, active fund management with this idea of people finding their work fulfilling?
I think that's interesting. Perhaps if I were to think of meaningful or fulfilling jobs, I probably wouldn't have gone to mutual fund managers. Probably they find it fulfilling. I'm sure they find it fulfilling in some ways and rewarding monetarily for sure. But I don't know if what is at play there specifically is the meaningful mechanism, right? When I think about whether the technical feasibility of automation is the same as actual adoption or the automation we're seeing in the market, I think of tax preparers, right? I think of, well, we've had, I don't know, TurboTax and things like that for many, many years, and we still have tax preparers. So there's still demand for that. I'm assuming they handle the more complex cases and not the very simple tax return that I file every year. But I do find that when it comes to meaningful jobs, I would lean more on things that are, I guess, creative or empathetic. So I would think of jobs in the healthcare sector and creative sector or social work kind of stuff. But those are the jobs that I think are maybe more for people seek out for being fulfilling, or even academia, right? You become a professor because theoretically you'd like to do research and teach. So there I would say, for example, in academia, even if AI could replace a professor, I would still see demand in terms of I want to have this job, and probably will still want to be taught by a human professor as opposed to a robo professor. For fund managers, I'm not sure. I'm not sure how the meaningful dimension plays in there.
Well, yeah, I got to imagine that the automatability of it factors in. I mean, just a personal anecdote about teaching. I used to teach Python, in data science for the business school at NYU. And I started finding that less meaningful, mostly because there were so many good alternatives. And you could learn Python and data science from, MOOCs and Coursera and all these things that were really, really good. And I thought, I'm not really doing a better job than these technological alternatives. But then I started teaching the future of work. And I love it because I feel like I'm uniquely able to teach it, and I have something that I'm adding that is not just already free on the internet. So I think that is a source of meaning that I feel like I've got some unique capability of producing this.
So you're attaching meaningfulness in terms of how uniquely positioned you are to do this, right? Not like inherent, "Oh, I want to help people," but it's about how unique you are to do that.
I think so. Yeah. Yeah. What do you think?
I think that can be a source of meaningfulness for sure, but it's not the only one, right? I personally would align in that and how I find meaning in my work. I decided to come to academia because I wanted to help the world, and I thought that with my particular set of skills, I was uniquely positioned to help the world in academia more than I was, uniquely positioned to help the world elsewhere. So that's why I came here. But I think that there are other folks that don't think about like their competitive advantage as a part of how meaningful their job is. Some people just like interacting with others and they find being able to help meaningful. And I don't know if they compare how well they're able to help here versus there as part of their meaning. Maybe it's just an inherent preference that they have. I don't know, but I think that's interesting. And for a different conversation on you saying that you taught Python and data science and there's so many amazing online alternatives, I agree. There are so many online alternatives that people can do. But there's also research showing that people often don't finish these courses, or MOOCs haven't been as transformative as we expected in the beginning because people lack motivation to maybe not necessarily motivation, but some of it might be motivation to finish the course. And some tech companies like Khan Academy just, I think, scrapped Khanmigo, which was their automated tutor for kids because they found that it wasn't as helpful as a human tutor.
No, I think that's right. I mean, I think there's a tremendous value for being a motivator as a teacher and being a tutor as a teacher. And I think maybe this was really just personal. I just wasn't interested. I was really mostly interested in being an expert as a teacher.
Sure.
That was a preference thing, I guess. So you mentioned like your, motivation for public impact, which I love. It's very exciting. What do you think can be done that is not happening yet? What are you excited about? How can we, the broader, thinkers in this space, change meaningful outcomes for people?
Well, I see a couple of avenues for that. I think one of them two. The first one that I'm very excited about is actually being able to shift the narrative to look at the opportunities that AI brings, not just as a replacement tool. And I think this is still a lot of work that needs to be done. I think maybe the narrative in the US is changing a little bit in the last couple, maybe in 2026 it's changing a little bit, but definitely in other regions of the world, it still needs to be it's a message that still needs to be discussed. So I think that's one thing that I'm very excited about. And perhaps another thing that I would really like to do that I don't see the people in my field, which is the future of work, thinking about is a lot of the work is being done just exclusively with regards to how AI can make us more productive. But AI can do so many other things for us, right? It can potentially help us, collaborate better with others. I don't think that has been explored that much, right? Right now, a lot of the research that we're seeing is just based on the worker and not based on the worker and their teams or the worker and the organization. That is a huge kind of area that I think I would be very excited to think about. And the other area that I think I would also be very excited to think about, which, might be a little bit more hippie for my colleagues, is what we were just talking about. How can AI actually help us find more meaningful jobs or dream jobs? How can we use AI to build these kinds of dream and meaningful jobs that would potentially make workers happier and also more productive? So that's my hippie side showing a little bit.
Yeah, that sounds exciting. I mean, you had mentioned that in the less developed world,
Mm-hmm.
I think you were saying, let me know if I'm misunderstanding, that there's kind of more pessimism around what AI will bring. Is that right? Why do you think that is?
I don't know. I don't have the statistic right now, but
Just
I
the
do.
vibes. You think the
Sure.
vibes are different?
Sure. I think that especially in some countries where, for example, if we talk about, hey, AI is replacing this very routine kind of jobs that are still white collar routine jobs, some countries are specializing in these kinds of jobs. So they're asking, oh my gosh, if this has been my winning horse for so long and now AI is going to take it away, what's going to happen to my economy, right? So perhaps we need to help them think of ways in which they can either shift or think of ways in which they can augment their workers so that they're not just suffering the effects of replacement, but also can develop economically, right? So I do think that that might be contributing to this narrative of fear. And the other thing is also just about access and familiarity with AI, right? Here in the US, everybody's talking about AI, and most people that I interact with on a daily basis have used AI for some sort of task. In other contexts, AI is just this kind of very abstract idea. We don't know how it works. So also as humans, we tend to be afraid of the unknown, and maybe helping these folks be more familiar with AI can also be a way to dispel these fears, right?
Yeah. On that note, I mean, one final question for you. Let's say you were in charge of creating a global labor market measurement system. What would you do?
Oh, wow. A global labor market measuring system.
Yeah, kind of like, I mean, you could take it in whatever direction you want, but I mean, something like ONET for the world or something like that. You know, if you're like running the global Department of Labor, whatever it is, and you had to like put out some data office, what do you think could be done that would be important?
I would measure so many things. And I think I would also really try to emphasize what are regional preferences, because for sure there are regional preferences, right? So
For
I
work
would
or for goods? What do you mean
So,
preferences on what dimension?
sure, at work, something that I often think about. So, I'm originally from Colombia, and I do think that there is a very large difference between what workers are expected to do in these roles. So, for example, potentially an accountant here in the U.S. requires, yes, sure, more technological skills than maybe in my hometown. But also in my hometown, the accountant might need to have more social skills, just because Colombia is a high context type of culture, and you need a lot more coordination, a lot more communication to be able to accomplish your tasks, right? So these are huge differences that are not captured with ONET. And I would love to be able to actually measure how the content of work changes across regions so that you can actually get work done, right? And right now, the way our taxonomies work, first of all, it's really hard to get them to talk to each other. And second of all, they're not comprehensive of all the different tasks that people have to do across regions. So that would be something that I would be very interested in measuring.
Okay, cool. Sounds exciting. Well, I hope someday that becomes your responsibility. I think we'll have a better world for it. Thank you so much for being part of the show.
Thank you so much for having me, Ben. This was very exciting.
The Economics of Work is brought to you by Rebellion Labs, workforce data for research and benchmarking. If you enjoyed, please remember to rate, review, and subscribe. It'll help us reach other curious listeners. I'm your host, Ben Zweig. Our producer is Cole Wagner. Thanks for listening.